With millions of legal and illegal immigrants living in South Africa, the fervor behind the latest xenophobic attacks cannot be ignored. Business leaders, especially business leaders with businesses that merge from South Africa into the rest of the African continent, are questioning whether or not they could possibly be silent at a time like this when their own businesses are being hosted by friendly African nations. This is not South Africa's finest hour. I'm Bruce Whitfield. Tonight, I'm joined by Wayne Ncube from Lawyers for Human Rights to talk about what's behind the latest attacks. These attacks, Wayne, are being ascribed to comments made by Goodwill Zwelithini, the Zulu king, about a week or two ago, in which he inferred that foreigners weren't welcome. The attacks start in Durban and have mushroomed through the rest of South Africa. What's your take on it?
Yes, I think public leaders obviously have a duty to make very considered statements. We've seen how powerful statements to ordinary South Africans are when leaders come out and set out very certain sentiments. And we should also remember that South Africa is in a new constitutional order. And in terms of our law, they set out very clear guidelines and they restrict certain language, particularly hate speech. And they set out standards for redressing where we're coming from in history, where we from an
you talk about history. I mean,
yes.
There's no shortage of irony here. I know that these xenophobic attacks haven't been aimed at Zimbabweans exclusively, but at a broad pool of foreign nationals living in South Africa. But it's probably about 200 years ago where Mzilikazi fled KwaZulu-Natal, ended up in what is modern-day Zimbabwe, created the Matabele, and was sort of one of the early kernels of modern-day Zimbabwe. Those people are trying to come back, essentially, to the homeland of South Africa, and one of the successors to Shaka, who chastened Mzilikazi away, is doing the same thing. Goodwill Zwelithini is repeating history 200 years later. It just, I think, amplifies how bizarre this concept of xenophobia is.
It is quite bizarre, and I think a lot of it comes down to a lack of understanding in terms of immigration patterns and the causes of migration and the role in communities, the role that I suppose foreign nationals have had throughout Africa. As your example illustrates, some of the people who are targeted probably have their roots in those areas in KZN. But it's, I think I would like to move away from the distinctions of very specific countries.
But that's it.
Yes.
I mean, you read Martin Meredith's
Yes.
5,000-year history of Africa. The 5,000-year history of Africa is characterized by one dominant factor, is that for the last 5,000 years, other than the Egyptians, pretty much everybody else has moved and has migrated from place to place to place.
Yes. I mean, that is true, but I think one of the things Lawyers for Human Rights as an organization that we really want to move away from is the smaller characterizations or generalizations in terms of who is being targeted. I think the emphasis really is that there has been a breakdown in the rule of law in certain parts of the country.
There has been a breakdown in the rule of law, and that breakdown in the rule of law is ascribed to this thing called xenophobia.
Yes.
The question is really, is that simply an excuse for wanton criminality?
Well, whether it's an excuse or not, our public servants, the government, the police, have to come out strong and be very clear, in their public statements, particularly the executive, in ensuring that there is strong condemnation of such actions. Thankfully, in a lot of situations, the police have responded very quickly, but what we need is for them to ensure that they keep protecting citizens, but more than that, to ensure that the effective prosecutions of these situations, if it is just criminal elements taking advantage of xenophobic remarks or not, if there is very strong and coherent prosecution of all these crimes that sends out a deterrence that deters any future xenophobic attacks, and ends this creature of this state of impunity for mob justice or xenophobic attacks.
President Jacob Zuma, this Thursday, he went into Parliament. He made a statement, finally, after recording a statement on the SABC, which was played out on Wednesday. He goes into Parliament on Thursday and he says this xenophobia thing must stop. It's taken an awfully long time for the most senior political leader in South Africa to respond to what's been a very rapidly growing crisis. That's just not good enough, is it?
No, I think it's good that a statement finally has come out. But the problem is there have been so many other statements from ministers and big public officials, and not all the statements are aligned to each other. There's not this coherent, consistent message throughout government. And I think it has to start with the president and your executives and all the ministers coming out very strongly condemning what's happening and issuing messages that are consistent with the Constitution, but also that restore the rule of law and ensure that these sentiments which are now echoing out are dispelled, because a lot of the reasons, I suppose, or a lot of the justifications behind these xenophobic feelings, a lot of these reasons or myths are easily dispelled.
Which brings us to the question is, what is it really all about? And ultimately, I mean, I think Bill Clinton summed it up in his first election campaign in the United States. He was to say, he summed up his election campaign saying, it's about the economy, stupid. And that's what it's about. If South Africa had had 5% economic growth consistently over the last 20 years post-democracy, we'd have a bigger, more inclusive economy which absorbs people and influences from around the world far more easily.
Yes, I mean, obviously you can link it to the economy, but very simply, you know, it's a country with a lot of this wide gap in inequality and a very large unemployment rate. And what will happen and what happens is, in such a situation, the easiest scapegoats are the most marginalized sectors in society. And right now, I suppose refugees and asylum seekers who have borne the worst brunt of the xenophobic attacks are the ones who are being targeted because they're the easiest targets for people to let out their frustrations.
They're also the easiest to access. If you're an American, a French or a German migrant to South Africa, it's unlikely that you're living in a township. These are people living inside marginalized communities themselves, and these are people in those communities saying, I'm having a horrible time here, I want to blame somebody, I'm going to blame you, and take it out. It doesn't help anybody, but that seems to be the pattern.
Yes, and I think understanding this, you know, this is not the first time we've seen such xenophobic attacks, which possibly were also fueled by, I suppose, inequality, poverty, unemployment, and frustration from that. In 2008, there were very terrible xenophobic attacks throughout the country, and again, the most vulnerable people, easily accessible people were targeted. And after that, those attacks, the South African Human Rights Commission came out and issued a report which set out all these recommendations to ensure that the lessons learned from that.
Have we learned anything?
I think this is our worry as an organization, because a lot of those recommendations were not implemented. And a lot of the integration programs and education towards South Africans in terms of the law, in terms of the role of migrants, in terms of their rights, and in terms of, I suppose, the cause of the reasons why a lot of the young people, the people who latch onto statements like from the King, are disgruntled. There's not a lot of information or education or integration of foreigners or explanation to these communities who are now lashing out at the foreigners.
People make the assumption that foreigners come to South Africa because it's a lovely place, and it is, but there's a reason why people leave their homes. There's a reason why people migrate. People don't migrate because home is perfect. They migrate because home is imperfect in many cases. People's lives, one looks at Somalia, people's lives are at risk. One looks at the civil war that tore apart the DRC. One looks at Rwanda, for example. One looks at Burundi. One looks at the tumultuous history. One looks at the economic issues in Zimbabwe, for example. And one's got to understand that this is simply people looking for hope in their own lives that come here get beaten up if they're lucky.
Yes, and I think it's important to note that, as you mentioned, in the Horn of Africa, there's a lot of conflict and these push factors that create refugees. We even receive refugees from as far as Syria. I mean, the world is not a perfect place, but the international community has resolved to offer refuge to those people who fear persecution in their country. And South Africa is one of these countries. In fact, almost every country in Africa houses refugees. South Africa is not the first country to house refugees. South Africa is not the first country to have migrants. But what has to happen, though, is that the people in charge of dealing with your asylum processes and your refugee processes, first of all, should be able to run those asylum systems credibly and clearly, so that there's no frustration felt by the locals, and also initiate integration programs that allows the immigrants to integrate and to add value to the local communities. And a lot of the research that has actually come out, I think last year, the Gauteng, I forget the exact name, but there's a body of the Gauteng province did a research in terms of the impact of refugee businesses, particularly in the township and in the economies, and they found that they actually add jobs and they create employment and this provide
But the information doesn't get out. And migrant communities by their nature also are value adders, not value detractors. But you talk to the woman who runs the Spaza Association of South Africa. She resents foreign Spaza owners. 5-10 years ago she had 10,000 members, now she's got 3,000. She attributes that directly to foreigners who come and do it better, smarter, and run their businesses better than South Africans. There's a lot of mistrust. Is it a government initiative to build trust between communities, to build the bridges that we so desperately need?
Yes, I mean, this is one of the things that came out of the Human Rights Report, the South African Human Rights Commission report in 2010, after the 2008 xenophobic violence. It's definitely the government's responsibility to inform the public in what is going on and inform the public of the role of foreign nationals. But further than that, I think they need to send out a strong message in terms of their own treatment of asylum seekers and refugees, because a lot of this, your ordinary South Africans, they pick up on the sentiments of their leaders, as obviously happened in KZN, but then before that, it starts in your asylum processes. If you see the treatment of asylum seekers in the asylum system, the closure of refugee reception offices, rampant corruption at these offices, the few officers that are still attending to people, the poor decision making in the asylum process.
Wayne, we need to leave it there, but it's a deep-seated problem, but it's a problem that could be addressed initially, at least, with some strong leadership. Wayne Ncube from Lawyers for Human Rights, thank you for coming in, and thank you for watching. There'll be more tonight, tomorrow. Good night and goodbye.